Hello and welcome to FinTech Talk. I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today we're looking at the rise of open banking payments. When open banking was launched in 2018, we saw the emergence of some pretty nifty apps, most of which looked at data aggregation and account analysis, so consumers could see where they were spending their money. Now we're seeing the second wave of open banking, and payments seems to be the area being disruptive. Open banking, in theory, can offer faster payments, higher security. It can offer extra convenience for consumers, new ways to log in. But not everyone is making the most of open banking. So we thought we'd host a masterclass in open banking payments. To do that, we've invited two global experts. From the retail side, we've invited Vanessa Alboran, who runs the checkout experience at Selfridges. Now, Selfridges is a department store that needs no introduction. It's been voted the world's best department store. I think Harry Selfridges even invented the phrase, "the customer is always right." So, Vanessa, if you'd like to turn your mic and camera on, it's lovely to have you with us. And is that right? Is Selfridges famous wherever you go in the world?
It absolutely is.
Thank you so much. And to join us, we wanted an advocate of open banking payments, and I think there's no more vocal advocate than TrueLayer. So payments a year, that's total 35 billion. And the clients include the neobank Revolut, the gambling giant William Hill, the investment platform Nutmeg. These are companies that know payments inside out, and they trust TrueLayer to handle money movements for them. So Nadia, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
Now, perhaps Vanessa, we can start off with what's wrong with current payment systems. I mean, it's your job to make sure that the customers at Selfridges have the best possible experience. And perhaps you could just tell us what it's like right now with your current tech stack and how you're looking to improve. And I should point out to our viewers, we've kind of invited Selfridges on because you guys are very open-minded about where to go now with your payments and are looking at open banking potentially. So yeah, Vanessa, where are we now with payments and kind of what's wrong with the current system?
I think largely it's made up of many, many vendors. So it's not just the customer online or in store, will go and they have their card or their phone, and they don't largely know that there are so many different steps in the payment journey from end to end. And that is what creates the friction, as we call it, in the online experience. And that's where all those different hops will cause a payment to fail, a payment to be declined in order to even be canceled by accident. And the more hops you have and the more vendors you have, that is more likely to happen. And so what we'll be talking more about with open banking is, how does that change the experience, either online and in store as well.
Fantastic. And Nadia, perhaps you could just, the pitch. People will be thinking, well, open banking payments, are there really any advantages? And well, in theory, there should be. So Nadia, if you'd just like to tell us, when you talk to people about the potential for open banking payments, how does TrueLayer sell it? I mean, what are the advantages? Oh, I can't hear your mic, Nadia, temporarily.
Classic. I said there are two sides to the question, really. Like, what are the advantages to the merchant and what are the advantages to the consumer, which ultimately leads to what we're here to talk about today, which is the adoption in the mainstream. And I think Vanessa has raised a few good points here, because recently what we've seen is that online payments are on one hand expected to be seamless and simple, but on the other hand, more and more people expect more security. And the good thing is that open banking can actually combine these two things quite beautifully together, and makes it a little bit smoother in the checkout compared to a full secure customer authenticated transaction on a card payment.
Great. Can you just give us, without getting too technical, just an ability to visualize how it works? Because people are familiar with the MasterCard system and the Swift messaging system, but open banking takes a bit of a different approach. Perhaps you could just tell us about how the plumbing actually works. What's going on?
Well, I can explain to you how it works at the front end and how it works at the back end. So from a consumer perspective, when they go to the Selfridges website, they choose a particular, let's say, a Burberry scarf to buy, and they put it in their basket. They click on buy now, and they get a choice of payment methods. The beauty with open banking is that right now there is flexibility in how you want to name this. You could call it instant bank payments, you could call it easy bank transfer, or what is very popular like pay by bank or pay by bank app. So they choose this particular method. They click on which bank they bank with, the bank account they want to use, and they get in the UK automatically redirected to that bank app that is, at least since the pandemic, installed on their phone, where they log in with, again in the UK, usually biometrics, so that's their face or their thumb. In there, they get a one screen that tells them that they're paying Selfridges, I don't know, £200 for a Burberry scarf, and they just click approve again, and they get automatically redirected back to the Selfridges website, and the transaction is confirmed. So compared to a full card flow, that now, since the enforcement of SCA has been, let's say, complicated a little more, what Vanessa was referring to is that in a card flow for a £200 Burberry scarf, they tend to have to also go through a secure customer authentication, meaning that they manually have to go into their banking app to confirm the transaction and manually have to go back to the retailer to finalize the transaction, or use a one-time passcode that is sent to them by text message. So actually the open banking flow in the UK is a lot smoother than a fully authenticated card flow.
That's really clear. Thank you so much. Now, Vanessa, how does that sound? I mean, how do you compare that open banking model to, say, some of the more legacy techniques? I mean, I'm sure we can all remember the days when we used to actually have to type in our bank card number. And
it does seem crazy, right?
Yep.
Doesn't it? I mean, I'm sure I do, and I know many of my customers get annoyed, like to think of typing something in, right? Completely. And so I think, yeah, what you're saying is when you look at it, right, as a customer, as a consumer, that sounds really good, you know. And then there's all the questions about what is open banking, and it's like almost this argument between people that are running and dealing with the actually mechanics of the end-to-end and the customers. You know, is this safe? Is this protected? You know, what are the regulations like? Where's my information going? And this seems to be what's really happening now, is that toing and froing. I want this to be end-to-end. As a company, I want to have a better customer journey for the people that are buying my products. I want them to feel safe. I want to have fewer vendors to manage. I want a better end-to-end product. But yet there's still a kind of idea about trying to unwrangle this womb that we're in, protecting us, and really trying to pick out, yes, we can somehow get through all of the education on what this means, and what is a good end-to-end process, for both sides.
Do you feel that customers do need educating? Because with the exception of maybe the MasterCard and Visa logos and their own bank logo, most customers know there are a huge number of payment services out there. There's confusion, but I mean, just tell us about consumer perceptions. Is that a real obstacle to adoption, or do people just go along? Because Selfridges is such a trusted brand. I mean, people tend to assume you guys must know what you're talking about. You wouldn't have a payment option there unless it was trustworthy. So just tell us the reality here. How do consumers see these options?
Yeah, I mean, because they just see something like Apple Pay, for example. That's very tried and trusted, isn't it? And also it's very fast, right? So that is a very good example of something that has shortened the payment journey generally. That's used, but it is just this concept of people sort of giving their sort of bank details, and it's really quite funny. But they'll do it if you have a QR code, they'll do it. They won't type it anywhere, but if you give them a code to do it, then they'll do it. It's a completely different experience.
Terrific. And Nadia, maybe we could just get into the nitty-gritty of how a company might install open banking. Because, I mean, one argument might be, God, is it really worth going through all the faff of introducing yet another payment infrastructure? Because I assume everyone watching will already have a pretty complicated set of options. So how easy is it to install something like TrueLayer or another open banking payment solution? And what is your expectation? I mean, for your clients, do they run it in parallel with other services? Do they only rely on open banking payments? What actually goes on under the bonnet?
If you don't mind, I'm happy to answer that
Yep.
question, but I'd like to go back to your previous question. There was a few things to touch on where you said, about the consumer education.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Consumer education needs to happen. And if we think back a few years, like you probably remember the introduction of chip and pin in 2005, 2006, and you had the logos like I Heart, chip and pin everywhere, because they were making people aware, like, hey, there's this thing happening that is changing the way you pay in store. And then a few years later, because chip and pin migrated all of the in-store fraud to like online, they're like, shoot, okay, let's introduce 3DS. So they introduced 3DS, which meant a lot of the banks were sending communications to their card holders saying, hey, you now need to register your card for this thing so you can pay safely online. It's just normal. You have to educate. Absolutely, you have to educate. And so with like I've just recently in my Amazon app, I saw there is a pop-up now that tells you about changing the way you pay in the app for card payments. They have register their phone and so on. Just very, very normal behavior. And the same thing needs to happen with adding open banking as a payment method to your roster as well. Now, going to your...
Do people actually use the term open banking in education? Because it sounds like quite a vulnerable term. It's a broad term. When people Google it, they'll come across all sorts of articles covering areas they never need to know about. So from your experience, what's the best way of selling it to people? I mean, just one possibility. The best way is not really to sell it to people. Just say, this is a better way to pay. And they'll go along with
it. Open, we would not expect to call somebody to call this thing open banking in their checkout. Absolutely not. I referred to it earlier. From our research, what we've done is Pay by Bank app resonates very well. The name bank in the name gives a lot of trust. Last year, we were at the British Retail Consortium for Open Banking Showcase. There was like 25 plus retailers in the audience, including Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis and so on and so forth. And the consensus was, in the absence of a trust mark, the white label approach that TrueLayer puts forward is the best approach, because the bank name instills trust in the consumer, and particularly combined with a brand like Selfridges, it is almost a double whammy, because like, I know Selfridges, they're good. Plus I pay with my bank, that's fine, rather than an unknown brand that people have never heard of before, unless, of course, it's all encompassing industry decided brand trust mark that will be rolled out, something like that was done with direct debit, for example, in the past.
So just from your experience, just to absolutely nail this issue, with William Hill, with Nutmeg, have they reported any sort of consumer resistance to this new payment method?
No. Okay. So what we're talking today about is the mainstream type of things, like the Selfridges of these world, like e-commerce retailer that gets open banking to the broad masses. What we've seen in the past is that industries like financial services, like the iGaming space, for example, businesses that traditionally maybe struggle to get mainstream card acquiring accounts because they're deemed as higher risk for various reasons, embrace new payment methods more easily. And there we've seen fantastic uptake. Some of the customers we work with have 60, 70, 80% plus share of checkout for open banking payments. Some decide to switch card payments off entirely, where some of the businesses, like FTSE 100 businesses that we work with in the gambling space, they put it in their checkout or in their cashier as part of launch, not even broadcasting the fact that they're adding this, and they got to over 10% share of checkout, overtaking PayPal within a month organically.
Okay.
I'm not saying that this is the reality for everyone. Again, people that place bets, they're used to seeing different payment methods, right? But certainly the way it's being broadcasted by the merchant to their customer base will make a total difference in terms of adoption and how quickly the payment method will be accepted by their customer base.
Fantastic. Well, that's extremely reassuring. Then maybe just get on to the kind of nitty-gritty of it, therefore. If someone works for a retailer and is thinking, okay, we've already got Apple Pay, we've already got MasterCard, we've also already got a whole suite of things already added. It sounds like maybe a bit of a faff to install yet another payment system. But is it? What goes on under the bonnet? And can people expect to have a lot of headaches? I mean, 2 years worth of implementation, or how does it work?
So I would say in terms of the implementation, it depends a little bit on the preferences of the merchant and very often on the size of the merchant. There are ways of implementing this within half an hour for smaller merchants that either sit on Adobe Commerce, formerly known as Magento, or WooCommerce or Shopify. It's so easy to just switch it on within half an hour and you're off. There are other ways, depending on how involved or how much resource a merchant has available, to either use hosted pages, use an SDK to get it up and running, go through one of their gateway partners to enable the payment method, or go for direct integrations.
Yeah, I think the implementation
okay, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Vanessa. I was going to bring you in because I'd like to ask you what you've made of all that, so please tell us.
Indeed, yes. Just following up. Yeah, I mean, because of course that would be one of our, as somebody focusing on delivery, how long will it take? How much money are we spending to completely switch gears, do something else? And we do find it largely, the amount of time it takes is a lot bigger than the original plan for a number of reasons, generally, So, and that is always something to be considered, particularly when you're moving something as big as payments. And that is something that is always asked about, but I have to say it's a varied answers, but I do find it takes longer than expected normally, and that can be a barrier sometimes.
I can add something to this, because this is a conversation we have all the time. It's this chicken and egg conundrum we find ourselves in, right? Here is us providers broadcasting, this is the best thing since sliced bread and you should definitely do it. And then the merchants go internally and are like, well, none of my customers are asking for it. Like, why on earth should I do this when I have got other things to deal with? And this is a conundrum that is difficult to overcome. But here's my reasoning. It's not a question of consumer versus merchant adoption, because a consumer cannot adopt something that isn't in the checkout that they don't know about. It's more about the consumer readiness. Are they ready to do this thing? And I would say, wholeheartedly, yes, they are. And the reason I say this is, number one, the pandemic means that even the most digitally skeptic folks have their open bank and have that mobile banking app on their phone, because, frankly, the branches were closed during the pandemic. If you wanted to know what's going on in your bank account, then you needed to have this thing on your app, and you know how to log in as well. Then secondly, the enforcement of SCA on card payments means now that consumers know there could be a second step in the journey of a payment. And like I said earlier, open banking makes this a lot smoother. Then again, open banking is something that a lot of consumers are now familiar with by paying off their credit card, sweeping funds from one account to another account, from their main account to their spending account, paying into Nutmeg for investments, or placing a bet on the Grand National or something. So it's becoming a lot more, or paying their tax, right? It's so topical because we just came through January. And then the fourth part of this is also, we have to think like, I'm an early millennial, right? I have a certain way of paying, but the younger generations, they're mobile first. They don't carry around their cards. They don't have a PayPal account, and they are a lot more security aware. And we've got about 750,000 of them becoming financially independent for the first time every year. So that's changing the way people go about online payments. If they sit down and you're and your app or your mobile website doesn't support the entry of the card payments, then they're not going to get off the sofa. This is a lost sale for a Burberry scarf. To stick with that subject. And so then the question is like, okay, so they're ready for it, I think. What about the merchants? Why should they adopt it? And I think going to the main topic of this podcast today, like, do I think it's going mainstream this year? I know there are some forward-thinking, innovative merchants that take the leap of faith and they will put this in their checkout because they're frankly fed up of the status quo. And they don't want to be ruled by the schemes to an extent by, card payments, by Apple Pay and Google Pay that is fed by a card payment, by PayPal that is loaded with a card payment, by buy now, pay later that is paid off with a card payment. This is an alternative, and it's only merchants can reap the benefits, but they have to take the leap of faith and put it in their checkout. I was at a conference last year, where the CEO of Currents, which is the company behind the very popular Dutch payment method Ideal, he was on stage and he said, actually. Ideal would have never gotten to the 70 to 80% share of checkout it has right now in the Netherlands if it weren't for merchants putting it in their checkout before it was a thing. They saw the advantages and they just did it, and the consumers adopted it.
Yeah, I would say that leap of faith, that is definitely key, because it's still people, even non-millennials, it's a brand, whatever it is, right? It's the brand that they look at, and then they feel back to that safety factor, that comfort factor. And it is true, the more you see any of that used, you will feel more comfortable, But it goes back to, like, there's still that little emotional thing in the background, for people making judgments, I think, on top of the convenience part, obviously.
Vanessa, I must say to our viewers, if you have a question, then please type it in the box and I'll pose it to our experts. Vanessa, I was curious about cost, because there is a certain little percentage that, MasterCard and Visa like to charge. There's a reason they can sponsor the Olympics and FIFA World Cup. They make a lot of money out of it. And we notice, certain apps, the Amazon, Apple dispute and stuff like that. Cost is significant. But from Selfridge's perspective, that tends to sell, quite premium end fashion stuff. Is that a thing you worry about? Is that a part of this equation for you?
I think that any merchant, any responsible merchant, cost is a factor, particularly with, with luxury clients who are spending a lot of money, and they're very large transactions as well that you see online, and that also, gets handled differently when we have not the volume of some merchants, but the size in terms of the actual payments. So yes.
Sure. Professor, I want to ask you maybe a rude question. It's this kind of, why is Selfridge's, has Selfridge's adopted this so far, may I ask? Open banking payments. I think you're considering them.
No. Yeah, we are looking, we have a number of different, in the sort of payment journey, a number of different vendors at the moment, and, we are assessing what is best for our customer, and ultimately, what is good, what's the offering that we can give, so we're just looking at a wide variety of solutions at the moment.
That's interesting. Well, I'm so pleased to have you on then, because that makes you the perfect spokesperson. But what's been holding you back? Because, open banking's been around for a while now, but I think many people watching this will be in the same position as you. So just give us a glimpse, really. Selfridge just auditioning for the best solution. Are there any question marks at all? Or is it just a question of, the board having their hands full with other things? From Selfridge's perspective, why haven't you guys already adopted this?
I think there's a couple of things that will cut across not only Selfridge's, but, most vendors at this time. There's, just general things you already have in flight going on. I think there is still the question of open banking, generally. Generally about that. What do the customers want? What have we implemented already? What is a successful solution? How do we line all of that up along with, going another way and doing another implementation and spending an amount of money, on an implementation and seeing the benefits of that quickly, as you would with anything, you want to put into place. But I think, from our point of view, from my point of view, really, that's part of the reason this discussion is so interesting, because it just seems like open banking, it's coming, and it's like every year, we're seeing a lot of discussion about it. And I was just wondering, when's this is there a floodgate? Are we at the floodgate point now? Is that what we're saying?
Well, it feels like we could be. Certainly looking at the transaction volumes, the amount of retailers offering this, definitely. Nadia, I just wanted to ask you about the data side of this equation, because open banking, the earliest applications for open banking were data-based. We've been talking about payments. Is there any overlap here? I mean, with your customers, are you purely a payments provider, or is there a data side to this equation?
You're absolutely right that initially when open banking first launched, there was a lot of focus on the data side of things. Personal finance management apps sprouting up left, right, and center. And we actually service a lot of them, like Plum and Chip are some of our customers in that space. But I think the beauty of open banking can be combining the two. So we, for example, have combined the data and the payment aspect of open banking in a product we call Sign Up Plus that allows the onboarding of new customers directly with a payment, verifying their not just their name and the account details, but also their date of birth and their address as part of a payment process, so that they can, quickly start placing a bet or launching an investment account, things like this. So I think another trend that we've seen recently is the rise of embedded finance, where traditionally non-financial services businesses add financial services to their product portfolio. And their open banking data side of things can make a big difference in helping assess the affordability and the creditworthiness of a particular customer before they give them a loan or a buy now, pay later product or things like this.
So that's a huge deal, though, isn't it? Because that means we're not just talking about offering people another way to pay. We're saying this is merely one part of a change in the way that financial organizations and retailers can view customers. They can get a fuller picture on people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, from Selfridge's perspective, I mean, have you investigated that side of things, Vanessa?
We're not at the moment. I think, again, it's just something that we've been looking at coming to us, but not quite yet.
Okay. And Nadia, to ask you, again, a tricky question is, there's always a downside to everything, but I've been scratching my head. And when I look at the advantages over speed and cost and security, it seems that open banking payments have so many plus points, but there must be a downside somewhere. So are there any shortcomings? Are there any areas that I mean, where are the objections that you deal with?
Well, the usual objection that we get is related to customer adoption, of course. Why would anybody ever adopt this thing? And what I tend to say here is that as a consumer, if you get the right incentivization, you are open to trying new things. We have a customer that is in the loyalty space, cashback type space, and they incentivize customers to use their services, and they give bigger rewards if they top up their account with an open banking payment versus a card payment. And one thing that I would say that is that processing a card payment or one of the alternative payment methods is very often a costly exercise. And the reason that it costs so much is that it pays for incentives that this payment method that you're offering to your customers gives to the end consumer. And that could be in the shape of longer period to pay off, some loyalty rewards, cashback, Avios, whatever. But the reality is that the merchant that pays for this by offering it in their checkout is very, very rarely the recipient of the repeat business or the loyalty, because the incentive that the consumer is given is spent elsewhere. And so when you look at how you could drive a consumer to adopt open banking, is that the savings that a merchant makes directly or indirectly, and directly through lower cost per transaction and indirectly through less fraud, fewer chargebacks and less operational overhead altogether, they can invest that into creating an incentive or loyalty scheme or expanding their current one to drive repeat business, to bring the consumer back to them to spend the money. And it doesn't have to be cold hard cash off. It could be something like a longer free trial period. It could be next day delivery, it could be free delivery, or I don't know, be added to a tombola or something. Like, there's so many ways to incentivizing repeat business and driving consumers over to trialing this payment method.
So it's a really creative retail tool. Fabulous. May I ask you, a personal curiosity, what is the reaction from MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal? Because for many years they've had a stranglehold on the entire payments ecosystem. But you're presenting a challenge. Do you have any relationship with them? Do you ever get a sense of what they are expecting to happen?
So I think if we think back of the origins of open banking and why this whole thing was even created in the first place, is it stems from the idea to free ourselves of the shackles of the US headquartered schemes that rule the payments world, and to create a pan-European payment method that works across borders in Europe, and that includes the UK. And the reality is that the schemes cottoned onto this, and they bought their own open banking providers, and they call themselves like multi-rail businesses, and also play in this space. I think going back to merchants taking the leap of faith, this is an opportunity right now to really drive forward the creation and the adoption of this pan-European payment method for merchants that are forward-thinking and are just fed up of the status quo.
So good. And Vanessa, again, nosy questions. I'd like to know how Selfridges assesses different payment options. I mean, we know you guys track customers throughout the website journey, in particular stuff like checkout fails, how many people get to the final aspect of buying something from Selfridges.com but don't complete the transaction. But for you, what are the metrics that really matter? Is it checkout completion? Is it fraud? Is it speed? Is it cost? Is it returning customers? What metrics do you think really matter when it comes to assessing a payment method?
There's a number of metrics, as you've said. You can look at it so many different ways, but I think the most obvious way that you first look at is uptake. What's the general uptake when you introduce a new payment method, or what's the split amongst payment methods? One of the things we've not touched upon, which is I actually think is quite important for open banking, is returns, because ultimately returns are supposed to be easier if you use open banking payment methods. So one of the metrics that people can where you see where people are going to one payment method or the other, maybe it's a little bit later down the road, how easy is it for them to use this consistently, for payments around holiday times and gifting and things like that. And of course, and then you have also sort of the things like acceptance and decline rates, come with those very basic standards, which is how is this measured? What's the percentage of people in a given area that we're seeing accept decline rates, and how does that also function in terms of fraud? Because you're not going to have 100% accept rate, because that doesn't seem right either, does it? Yeah, there has to be something that's usually along the way that you might have some declines, which I think is also sometimes can be a bit tricky to assess. So agree with you. There's a number of metrics, but usually the first one is just are people are using it. It's a little bit broader on a few different lenses. You can look at that to really tell what's best.
And just currently, you talked about some of the frustrations consumers may have. Where does Selfridges identify its current pain points, as they say? Is it cards being declined? Is it the fact that consumers are confused by payout options? What do you identify currently as?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's confusion. I think it's just making the payments, which can be it's just getting they want to have a fast payment, and there's also just there's a few elements. It's not just the payment method; it is the checkout journey as well, which is quite important. too. But nobody wants to sit around for 20 seconds waiting for an authorization. Once they've done it. But there's a little bit of a balance there. But back to people want to check out quickly, and in retail that is simply key. To be able to get through the journey quickly, and payment is the final option, final step, and you have it confirmed.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
one of the things to add here maybe is that from an open banking perspective, the refund journey can actually create a lot of loyalty, because unlike a card payment, once you receive your the goods back, let's say for an online shopper that returned their goods, you can put the funds straight back into their account. And it's a lot quicker than with a card payment. But even if you have somebody that shopped something online and they want to return it in store, you can actually refund them to their bank account straight away, which means that you could have, particularly in the case of Selfridges, where very often the items were purchased at pretty of high value. With a card payment, they might have to wait a little bit longer until they've got the liquidity back in their bank account. But with an open banking payment, it's instantly in their bank account and they're in your store. They could spend it straight away again. So that is one thing that we see that merchants find pretty attractive about the payment method.
I can imagine so. And we've only got 4 minutes left. Nadia, if people watching this want to get involved in open banking payments, what's the next step? Do they contact their bank? Do they contact a systems integrator? Do they contact TrueLayer directly? What's the best way of proceeding?
Yeah, I would say I think as a whole, the time to explore open banking further is now. So I would suggest as an action point, maybe for those that are interested, to do like a thorough assessment of their current payment landscape, to understand the pain points that you were just asking Vanessa about, and then yes, engaging with a scheme independent open banking provider and find out about the implementation process, the potential cost saving, a joined up customer incentivization approach to drive adoption that is so important when you implement a new payment method. And become a trailblazer in the area of open banking.
Fantastic. And Vanessa, really final question to you is, when you come to pick your open banking payment provider, how long will it take you to implement from start to finish? I mean, we heard it could take half an hour, could take a little bit longer. What do you expect? What's the roadmap for implementation?
I'd say a little bit longer. Again, this is a bit further away, on our roadmap at the moment. But I have to say I'm still dubious about timing. If it's quick, I would be more than thrilled. I'd be more than thrilled to be happy about that. But we shall see, and I think it will still be a little bit longer than is expected.
Okay, fantastic. Well, guys, thank you so much for your contributions. I'm sold, but I kind of was before we started, but I'm even more devoted now to open banking payments. They just make sense. They're faster, they're more secure, they're more versatile, they're easy to implement. And as Nadia says, it really does break the stranglehold on some of the American providers and creates a method that is so sophisticated. We can add data, we can create entirely new businesses around it. So I'm so grateful to have you with us. So Vanessa and Nadia, thank you for your time from FinTech Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.